is being recorded. Hello, everyone. I would like to welcome you all today to the Mandaean Cultural Identity webinar, and thank you all for being with us today. We are so pleased today to welcome our distinguished speakers, Tarmida, Yuhana, Nashmi, and Rooan Kalmashi, who will share with us their valuable presentation on the Mandaean cultural identity. Also, I would like to mention that this webinar is part of a joint visiting scholarship from Nahrein network at the University College London and the British Institute for the Study of Iraq, and in cooperation with the Institute of Arab and Islamic Studies at the University of Exeter. The webinar will last for an hour and a half. 30 minutes will be given for each speaker, and after which time will be available for questions and answers. Please use the Q&A chat box to write your questions during the webinar, and our presenters will answer all your questions after the presentations. Also, I would like to mention that the webinar will be recorded and then we'll post it on YouTube, and a link will be shared on the social media too. Now, I would like to introduce our first speaker, Tarmida Yuhana Nashmi. Tarmida Yuhana was born in Baghdad. He lives in Sydney since 2000. He is a visual artist, ceramist, and he has several exhibition and art projects. He uses his cultural heritage in his modern and practice to create dialogue. He teaches ceramics at Campbelltown Art Center and Kasula Powerhouse Art Center. He was initiated as Tarmida in Baghdad in 1996 and served the community since then. He is one of the co-founders of the Mandaean Human Rights Group in 1999. He has several publications related to the Mandaeans. He worked for more than 15 years in the refugee sector in Australia and abroad. He worked with the University of Exeter in cultural preservation project regarding the world of the Mandaean priests. And currently he is working with a group, he's working as a group therapist in Sydney. Tarmida, Yuhana, thank you very much for accepting our invitation, and I will leave you the floor to present your presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Dhiaa. Trying to share my screen. Can you see my screen?
Yes, it's clear.
So, cultural identity through visual art and storytelling. A Mandaean case study. This presentation is about Mandaeans, their cultural identity through visual art, according to the projects that I designed and delivered with the community, with generous help and support from art institutions, local city councils, and government and non-government organizations. Thank you, Dr. Dhiaa, and all the people behind the scene for organizing this event. Really appreciate it. I would like to start by acknowledging the Darug people, the traditional custodians of the land. Where I currently live and work, and pay my respect to their elders, past and present, and their connections to land, sea, and community, and always was, always will be an Aboriginal land. The agenda for my presentation, I will start with an introduction, brief introduction, and then I will talk about the project 100 Souls, 100 Stories, 100 Tiles. And I will briefly as well talk, the main presentation is going to be about that project in particular. And I will talk briefly about other projects that I involve the community. And we'll conclude with some words, and I'll put some further resources for more information about the projects. Quick facts about the group. The Mandaean community is an ethno-religious community originated from Iraq and Iran. They still exist in Iraq and Iran, unfortunately decreasing in number, scattered across more than 10 countries. The population of the Mandaean community between 40 to 50,000 around the world, no more than that, suffered and suffering from cultural and religious persecution. Mostly they arrived as refugees to the West, have no collective political or religious agenda. Their religious practices and teaching focusing mainly on inner self, and they are less interested in the outer systems. They are concerned and trying to preserve their unique cultural identity, also the sense of community. They're not a new established cult. Finally, they are in love with the rivers, waters. And this is true. Living water isn't only important and sacred in rituals. It's important and sacred in teachings and mythology too. There is a Mandaean expression in the literature. It's like, I wish you to be like water, or be like the nature of water, means in the attitudes and the state of mind. Two pictures of Mandaeans. Mandaeans from the last century. I think this photo has been taken by British scholar Lady Drower of the Mandaean of south of Iraq in the 30s of last century. And the second photo on the left, Mandaean women, 2021 in my studio in Sydney when we were working on the tiles. In contrast to most scholarly interest about the historical Mandaeans, this presentation is dealing or shedding the light on the Mandaeans as a dynamic, present people who are concerned about their cultural heritage. Because of the antiquity of their culture, language, and religion, Mandaean people often feel like they are viewed not as real people, present people with a living culture, but as an archaeological object, more at home in a museum than in a modern society. And this has been expressed by Mandaeans in their internal discussion. Art and art making has a very extraordinary job in terms of allowing us to reflect on who we are, what we are, our values, our world's views, our inner self, what we call it Nishma in the Mandaic language, means the soul or the morning breeze, and connect us with others. It is a visual storytelling. The community, the Mandaean community, has a good number of unique spiritual related art manuscripts. You can see it on the slide, some of them. Such as Diwan Abathar, manuscript of King Abathar, Qadaha Rabba, the manuscript of the Great Creation, and Alma Rishaya Rabba, the manuscript of the Great Upper World. We are lucky today to still have them, and thanks for our ancestors, the Pathan Qadmai, where they were able to preserve them for us. But unfortunately, the practice of making this type of art has vanished, or if I want to be a bit hopeful, I would say almost vanished. One of the deep observations made by one of the Western scholars about the Mandaeans was like, I'm quoting, their practices are more sacred than their books. This translates very well with me as a Tarmida and as an artist as well. And also working with many Mandaeans who suffered and still suffering from both current situation in Iraq and Iran, and also concern related to the historical trauma of cultural loss. Dialogical, conversational, or community-based art, as being put by Paulo Ferreri, the artist deposits an expressive content into a physical object to be withdrawn later by the viewer with the process of dialogue and collaboration. I see this project as a creative way for people in the Mandaean community to be more connected to their roots and also to build a sense of collective identity, reclaiming their cultural identity after a history of cultural assimilation and oppression. Art is often seen as an expression of an individual, but I was hoping this project would also be an expression of a community. I like how Roy Marchant, the public program producer and a lecturer, and we worked together on this project and also on another projects. He explained it in his native language very well. He said, it is a social investment in which art plays an integrated role in shaping the social, physical, and economic characters of a community. The permanent installation of the work is a transformative investment, a space becoming a place of identity, social currency, a gathering place within an architecture of exchange. Our earliest recorded human history is of communities gathered in the presence of art. And this is exactly what our Mandaean Nasurians were doing in their historical Mandaean community. And also from Australia, this is what we learned from the native nation of Australia, the Aboriginal people. They gather together to make art. Community engagement has a multitude of forms, but arguably community art in all its forms has the ability to be the most transformative, like multicultural education. Art is often used to shift or challenge people's understanding about a particular social group, issue, or historical event. It makes visible issues facing different social groups in our society. The universal language of art offers a more contemplative accessibility, a point of neutrality from which to commence understanding. As a force, community art disarms the instruction of assimilation. But why we used clay in most of the art projects, community-based art projects that I'm going to talk about? It's a legitimate question. Mandaeans have a material and spiritual connection to the natural environment. Clay, together with water, plants, and reeds, is very important in religious rituals and is used to make religious objects as well. The great sin in the Mandaean theology is to pollute rivers. This is possibly not surprising, as in their traditional homeland of Mesopotamia, Iraq and Iran, one of the most common materials was clay. Clay was used for pottery, houses, monumental buildings, and to record history through the famous clay tablets. Skills in using clay were developed over thousands of years in Mesopotamia. For this reason, we decided to use clay to bring that special connection between the intangible aspect of culture and the participants in their new environment. Beautiful and insightful comment I received from Dr. Susie Baidawi. She commented about one of my videos working with clay. She said, working with the clay to me seems a lovely metaphor for the alchemical process of softening the hard places, the fixed places, with emotion, water, then balanced conviction, fire, to create something entirely new. It is the alchemical process of transformation. Resonate with me, both as an artist working as my medium is clay and as a Tarmida too. And working and clay, medium of clay, we have like more than 30,000 years old of a human interaction, and we still use it. The initial inspiration for the project. So Mandaean, traditionally speaking, the Mandaean ancestors were keen to write a section in their manuscripts called Ee-Zharat. When they write or copy their religious manuscripts. So Ee-Zharat is a plural word of Izhara, which is literally means warning or something to bring the reader's attention to. This might be a footnote, a verse explanation, or a personal account story. Usually the writer or the copyist tends to share his or her personal account for future generations. This person could be a male or a female. The copyist shares stories or other people's stories that happened in their time. This writing attitude left each manuscript as a unique and an important writing piece because of its individual personal account, which has historical significance. The Ee-Zharat also have rules that the person copying the manuscript must follow. Through these techniques, the Mandaeans kept their stories alive and added individual community aspects with the inherited religious sacred writings. Usually the copyist prepares his own papers and ink according to an inherited traditional method. All must be made from natural resources. This practice is usually done next to a river, and the copyist will mention the name of the river in his or her account in the Ee-Zharat. And the 100 people who from the community who participated in that project, actually we've done it at Kasula Powerhouse Art Center in the Clay House. And the Clay House, the Kasula Powerhouse, it's by the bank of George's River. So it's like a couple of meters from the river, 5 meters. Unfortunately, this cultural practice has been endangered and almost lost in the community for various reasons. However, this project can be seen as bringing awareness in the hope of suggesting new creative ideas and ways of cultural survival within the community itself. The project 100 Souls, 100 Stories, 100 Tiles. So we have 3 stages: stage 1, stage 2, and stage 3. This project about exploring people's stories, individual and cultural, and inner creativity through making ceramic tiles that capture something of importance to them. They were then given the opportunity to write about their artwork, which proved to be a powerful, albeit indirect way for them to express their identity as well as their fears and hopes. Through creating artworks, people were able to not only express themselves, but also connect in a meaningful way to their own culture and heritage. So the leading questions was, imagine this tile that you're gonna make. It's gonna be found in 50 years' time. What do you wanna tell that person find your tile, about yourself, about your identity, cultural identity, share stories? So they brainstorm on a piece of paper, and then they get introduction, how to work with the clay, and then they design their own tiles. So we ended up, after 6-7 sessions, 100 tiles. Stage 2, we were able to exhibit the tiles to the public in an exhibition at Kasula Powerhouse Art Center in 2019. And it's supposed to create, using those 100 tiles, to create a bigger, a large scale artwork using these tiles, and to be put in a public place. But this stage has been delayed or postponed due to the pandemic. So we are hoping to resume hopefully soon on that. So the third stage is publishing the book, which is, this book is available on Amazon. We put all the photographs of the tiles with the stories that being shared by the person, in both languages, Arabic and English. And I'm also very grateful to the group of inspiring scholars from around the world who expressed an interest in the project and agreed to contribute to this book. So we have some writings from other people too in the book. What's the benefits? So these are some of the benefits that we this project is organically evolved from stage 1 to stage 2 to stage 3. So on a multicultural society, raise awareness, expand understanding, strengthen multicultural society and cultural diversity. On a Mandaean community level, including young generations, strengthening leaderships and role modeling for future projects, enhance the new generation sense of belonging, the community to be involved in conversation around their new life situation as equal citizens in the Australian context, a record of the men. This is very important. This is one of my interest here related to the Ee-Zharat, the concept of Ee-Zharat, a record of the community social and cultural history, and also a platform for healing and growth to the community. On the refugee sector level, this project will add value to our understanding of refugee experiences and post-settlement activities, shed light on different understanding and practices around engaging people from refugee backgrounds, especially from minority groups like Yazidis, Mandaeans, Chaldeans. Also gives a platform for building collective resilience, growth in our homeland of Australia. On the art community level, this project will shed more light on the importance and the vital role that art plays in our lives as individuals and collective groups alike. This project will be a sign of advocacy for more community-based art activities. So briefly, I will explain the other project that we were involved in at the moment as well. So this is a quick brief. So the first one is Ishkinta. Ishkinta is a site-specific installation during Blake Prize 2018 at Casula Powerhouse Art Center, and was inspired by the cultural heritage of the Mandaeans. So the Blake Prize is an Australian art prize awarded for art that explores spirituality, and it's named after the English poet and artist and William Blake. This work was part of the 65th Blake Prize public program at Casula Powerhouse Art Center 2018. The word Ishkinta translates to house or to settle in the Mandaic language, which is an Eastern Aramaic dialect. Ishkinta originates from the ancient Mesopotamian culture, and the Mandaeans adopted and used it in their mythology and religious practices. The Sumerians built their houses and temples from clay if they lived in the cities, or reeds if they lived in the marshlands, or both. Similar construction can be found nowadays in the marshland of southern Mesopotamia. The artist modified the original construction according to his vision. So I changed it a bit, modified it. I used bamboos, reeds, tree trunks, clay mixed with human hair and straw. All materials were collected locally from Liverpool, New South Wales, Australia. So, and my artist statement for that is, nature is our true temple and nothing will last forever. From the project 100 Souls, it's been designed and delivered for the Mandaean communities specifically. I received some interest from other communities, a wider community, to start another project, but we will open it to the wider community. So this project started, which is called From Home to Here, My Journey in a Clay Art Project. And more than 80 people participated in that project. More than 40, 50 nationalities, cultural backgrounds, ethnic groups from India to Iraq to Morocco to France to England to New Zealand to the States to Libya, Serbia. So different cultural backgrounds and nationalities participated in this project. The final artwork will be exhibited at Campbelltown Art Center, January 2023, with a public program attached to it. This is another pictures from participants and tiles as well. And recently we just finished this project completed, which is the River Project, Sydney Biennale 2022. So Sydney, the Biennale of Sydney is an international festival of contemporary art held every 2 years in Sydney, Australia. It is a large and well-attended contemporary visual arts event in the country. So basically, with the Hindu community and an Aboriginal community, all they were performance. I participated with a group of Mandaean people to create an artistic scenes on the bank of the river. So basically involved like more than 90 people to create a little sculptures. They created like more than 220 little sculptures in a process throughout the workshops to reflect on their connection to the river. So, and they made those little sculptural work. And on top of that, I did like an art installation. And this art installation was inspired by cultural, Mandaean cultural practice. It's called Mandilfa. So a mandilfa is a reed and clay structure, around 20 centimeter by 20 centimeters, used in the Mandaean death rituals. So I used this as a concept concerning life and death. So the mandilfa was created in a human size installation, 170 centimeters, inside the river, with ceramic objects representing a human interaction with the rivers, with the river, concerning life and death. So we did some pictures from different workshops, one in my studio and one in one of the local libraries in Liverpool and Fairfield as well. I do as well involved, oh, I think I pressed it too much. Okay, we'll go back to this. So because of the previous, the benefits from the previous projects, we started to, with the help from START, the New South Wales Service for the Treatment and Rehabilitation of Torture and Trauma Survivors. So we started more online interaction, hands-on workshops. One of the creative approaches during the pandemic. So this can be done as well virtually. Last words, I would like to end it with someone in the group put the underlying message: we are here, but we were there too. And thank you to Rooan. She was one of the 100 souls that she made a beautiful tile, and she shared a beautiful story. a short one, reflective story. So she said in her tile, you can see the tile on the right side. Rooan said, mountains, stars, rivers, Mandaeism. My piece is a constellation of the elements that define me. The mountains form the backdrop, and through it, I feel human and small. My body is made of stardust. The rivers speak to my ancestors as they rivered their way through freedom. They search for kushta, meaning truth in Aramaic Mandaic. My kushta isn't defined by the borders of this tile, nor of the clay. It is internal and within. It is not fixed, but flowing just like the rivers in the frame. This is my universe. How beautiful is that? And I will conclude with as well what Roy Marchant put in a very in a meaningful way. He said, 100 souls, 100 stories, 100 tiles is a testament to not only how successful that engagement can become, but also the vital role that such programming provides within the local community as a means of expression, identity, and inclusion. If you want to know more, this is my website. I put sometimes stuff there. This is my Instagram. This is my Facebook account for my artwork and projects. This is my YouTube channel concerning art. And this is the Shkinta, the Mandaean Heritage channel that I created last year in order to bring or convert the Mandaean literature into an audio version. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Tarmida, Yuhana, for this brilliant and amazing presentation, and thank you very much for sharing your three projects with us. I've already been asked about the link for the recorded session because some people they didn't catch up the beginning of your culture, so we told them that we will share it with them later on. Thank you for that again, and thank you very much for accepting our invitation to deliver your presentation. Now we are moving to our speaker. Next speaker, Rooan. Rooan Kalmashi is a fourth-year law student at the University of Technology in Sydney. She is currently working in commercial law, but has contributed to a number of local, regional, and international initiatives, including policy work with settlement services and with the United Nations. Her interest in policy and refugee advocacy is shaped by personal experiences the Mandaean community have endured over the decades. In 2019, Rooan was a finalist in the Third Sector Young Leader of the Year award for non-for-profit work. Rooan, thank you very much again for accepting our invitation, and please, if you may start your presentation.
Thank you for that introduction, Dr. Dhiaa, and thank you for having me here. I feel very honored and humbled to be speaking alongside Yuhana. Yuhana, always a tough act to follow, no matter what it is. Today, I don't have slides, so I'll try my absolute best to be engaging with my hands, or as my mum likes to say, let the eyebrows do the talking. Before I begin, I too would like to acknowledge the Cabral clan of the Darug Nation and go beyond acknowledgement in saying that I support the Uluru Statement from the Heart to achieve justice for First Nations people and a referendum to enshrine a First Nations voice in the Constitution. And I also want to extend that hope for autonomy to all Indigenous communities worldwide. Look, I may be biased, but Mandaeanism fascinates me. And it fascinates me because, at its essence, the nucleus and the core teaching of the core of Mandaic teaching is that it is a philosophy of life. It's pacifist, it's egalitarian, and the name Mandaean comes from the Aramaic menda, which means to seek knowledge. I think in today's day and age, in the postmodern world, if we've read too much Nietzsche and we are having a midlife crisis, we're most likely going to sit down between the walls of our rooms or on our office desks and contemplate our existence. But historically, in the East, when that happened, seekers after truth were peripatetic, which is the term which means their intellectual voyages for truth and spiritual peace, they were physical. What also fascinates me about Mandaeanism is the matter of its origin. It's highly controversial. Some scholars emphasize a Babylonian element. Some argue that Mandaeanism originated in the area of southwestern Mesopotamia in early pre-Christian times, and others base their case on the quasi-historical text, the Mandaean document, the Haran Gwata, which basically narrates an exodus from Palestine to Mesopotamia in the 1st century AD of a group called Nahreins, which are our ancestors. But I think the story that I like to follow and the consensus is that our ancestors traveled along the Mandaean Silk Road and settled along the lower reaches of the Tigris and the Euphrates, the land between two rivers. And this is the scholar Joran Buckley's theory of how we came into being amidst a cross-cultural environment of the Mandaean Silk Road. And I think this offers an excellent explanation, and it logically accounts for the intersections of Gnostic, Zoroastrian, and Jewish traditions that are present in Mandaeanism. Buckley is quite the prolific voice in Mandaean studies, and later on I'll talk about their discussion on women's right to priesthood in Mandaeanism. So as you can see through historical literature, Mandaeans lived as a minority under several ancient empires, and I genuinely think that our survival and the continuity of the culture has been nothing short than remarkable. Babylon, the Assyrian Empire, the Persian Empire, the Ottoman Empire, and during Parthian rule, Mandaeans flourished under royal protection. However, this protection did not last, with Sassanid Bahram I, who ascended to the throne, and his high priest persecuted all non-Zoroastrian religions. We also had, at the beginning of the Muslim conquest of Mesopotamia, the leader of the Mandaeans, Anush, appeared before the authorities, showing them a copy of the Ginza-Rabba, which is the Mandaean holy book, and he told them that our Mandaean prophet is John the Baptist, who is also mentioned in the Quran as Yahya ibn Zakaria, and this provided Mandaeans a status as a legal minority religion within the Muslim empire. There's also a story of a student in Lower Iraq who wrote an article in this Egyptian periodical, and he described Mandaeans as star worshippers, and from then indignation broke out amongst the Mandaean priesthood, because that's basically the old accusation of paganism, and legal proceedings were taken against the author, and the Ginzabra was dispatched to Baghdad armed with the Ginza-Rabba, the holy book, to translate before them, witness passages in this book that denounce the worship of planets. Even under Saddam Hussein's rule, protection was provided on the condition that Mandaeans wouldn't interfere with politics. And so throughout history, for the most part, Mandaeans stayed quiet. And throughout the decades, they excelled in ancient artisan practices like boat making, silversmithing, and goldsmithing. Most of the traveling was done by canoe or small boat in the Iraqi marshlands, which are heritage listed. And so it makes sense that Mandaeans would excel in this craft. My father actually himself was an alchemist. He made gold. But unfortunately, all this really toppled down when you had the persecution and the invasion and occupation of Iraq in 2003. And this was disastrous in every sense of the word. Isolation turned into targeted killings by extremists, women raped, whole families executed, if not for their gold, then just for their mere existence. And my father was one of the many men in the community who were kidnapped, but fortunately for us, one of the few who returned. And it was right here that a process of dissimulation took place. And in sociology, this word refers to this deliberate concealment of your religious beliefs, and it may be performed on a situational short-term basis or over a longer period of time, and in some cases spanning generations. It's performative in nature, and it's employed for a variety of reasons, including to save your life, to protect your property, to obtain and hold government jobs, or simply to prevent unpleasant situations from arising. And this is often occasioned by the immediate threat of religiously motivated violence, and it's a deliberate strategy to avoid conflict. And I think this idea of situational dissimulation is particularly true when I reflect on instances of it happening in my own family. My mum would talk about this one experience that she had repetitively in primary school and in high school in the Basra in Iraq, when she pretended to convert and recite a prayer just so that she could have friends and wouldn't be marginalized and excluded at school. Another scholar that I find quite interesting that talks about Mandaeanism, and his analysis is quite a sobering one. He says that Mandaeanism was an idealistic egalitarian faith, and that it is only due to unfortunate exposures to external influences that it degenerated into a monastic tradition marked by priestly esotericism and concern for ritual behavior, particularly around the conversation of women. There is quite a gendered view of women in the community, which very much contradicts Mandaean literature and history. Buckley studied the Mandaean colophons, which are these extensive scribal copyist lineages that Yuhana actually spoke about, and they're appended to almost all Mandaic manuscripts, and there is substantial historical evidence to suggest that women, Mandaean women, held priestly office and they practiced baptism. And these women's names are listed in the colophon material. 30 female priests, 2 of which were Ginzabras, which is basically the highest level of priestly office that you can hold in Mandaeanism. And so persecution and the invasion of Iraq, probably one of the primary reasons why Mandaeans have sought humanitarian refuge all over the world. And in healing our trauma, it really follows that one of the central rites for Mandaeans is a full body immersion in fresh waterways, fresh flowing waterways called Yardina. There is a tension today between women's rights, human rights, and cultural identities in the growing diaspora. And I suppose my question to the audience is, and a question of reflection is, how do we depict and frame it in a way, how do we frame human rights in a culturally sensitive way so that it can acknowledge and ease this conflict between universal human rights and cultural identities, which sometimes might be conflicting? Another question for reflection, Mandaeans, a culture that has been on survival mode for most of its existence, how do you now tell it to heal? How do you heal as a community? Not only is trauma passed on intergenerationally, but it is cumulative. My own family's personal experiences, coupled with my work with refugees over the years, have really shown me that trauma is never purely an individual problem, and no matter how personal or private, trauma cannot belong solely to a family. The consequences of trauma, the cumulative effects of personal, familial, historical traumas seep across communities, regions, lands, and nations. It is spiritual injury, it's soul wounding, it's ancestral hurt. And if it's not dealt with in previous generations, it has to be dealt with in subsequent generations, and it may become even more severe. And from the bottom of my heart and a deep love for my heritage and history, I genuinely hope and pray that the Mandaean community heals and that the numbers grow organically, and that many Indigenous communities all over the world follow in this step as well. And though sure, I know we're running a bit short on time, but I'll leave it to Dr. Dhiaa now to open the floor for questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rooan, for for your insightful presentation and for your reflection and questions. Now we leave the floor for our audience to ask, to use the Q&A box. I think I have a question. So that we wait for others to participate to write their own questions. You know that the Mandaean community has been decided to live in isolation due to different circumstances. The killing, the prosecution, and the killing after 2003, and even before. And some of them, they decided to flee the country. My questions: do you think that that they will come back again to Iraq? Because among this challenge that they face, whether in the diaspora or inside Iraq, and I still hear people that they want to leave Iraq because of this. They face a difficult situation living here in Iraq, and those who are living in the diaspora, they are looking inside inside Iraq. They want to come back again, so they are in between. And with the challenges that the young generation that who never lived inside Iraq, and they don't have this connection or the cultural identity, the Mandaean cultural identity in Iraq, and so they have the young generations or who are born in the diaspora, and their parents are, from the interviews I did, they said we have no control over them. So how do you think that they can face such can go along with these challenges, the language and the young generation in terms of teaching them the rituals, the Mandaean identity?
I think this is probably an issue that doesn't only speak to the Mandaean community, but across most communities that have come from developing countries to the West and now are trying to, continue their identities. I think Yuhana does it brilliantly. I think art is a universal medium for young people to connect. And I think through his work, young people are able to understand what the authenticity and truth in Mandaic teachings are, and through art is one of the ways which it can be shown. So I think perhaps changing the language and framing your culture in a different way to make it more accessible and to make it more easily digestible.
Thank you very much. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you for that question, and thank you for Rooan. I just want to add something. I found it interesting and important to point out is Dr. Dhiaa used the word deciding to leave the country or deciding to live in isolation. I think nobody want to live in isolation. Actually, the Mandaean community, they were forced to leave the country. They were forced as well to live in isolation. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah, and because because of the threats and the danger they face along the periods of time, and the waves of killing, etc. So they decided to live, very close to each other, and they become very sensitive. Who they become a friend or make a relationship with, and you know what I'm talking about, especially in Iraq. And because it's difficult to know to introduce yourself as a Mandae for the rest of the community within that negative stereotype and what is already negatively constructed in the mind of many people. Yeah. Thank you. Now we have another question. How has the community adapted to the diaspora situation it found itself in? How do they keep the youngsters in touch with the heritage?
We just online, I think we have multiple youth forums. We have Mandaean youth groups. We have the Mandi, which is the primary place of worship, and they do run a lot of events for young people. So I think that's probably the primary way that the head of the community are trying. But I think also just within ourselves, I've got a network of Mandaean girls, and we've got group chats, and we're very much in touch and conversing in conversations that are meaningful and talking about our heritage and reflecting. So it does exist. I think it's just a matter of reaching out and finding those networks.
Thank you. With regard to the point you mentioned, Rooan, some people and one of your the people as your mother, she said that she was practicing something that she did not want to. I've also heard some people talking about that. For example, practicing some religious rituals in Iraq. They sometimes they do it in terms of compliment or getting along with the other communities around. So do people still feel they are enforced to practice something they don't want to?
I think Mandaeanism values choice, definitely.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't think, I do understand there would be cultural influences and family influences, but I think if we're going to look at the Mandaean literature and just take that in isolation, I think Mandaeanism prioritizes choice, and it respects women and it values women. So I think as long as you follow that, then really you should have no issues. But I do understand the struggles that a lot of women in the community face, because there are family influences, there are cultural influences that are heavily placed, and it's quite unfortunate.
Mm-hmm. And we are waiting for other questions. If anyone has a question.
And feel free to ask follow-up questions if I'm not
Yeah.
directly answering anything.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Also, I have another question while we wait others to ask. Is it true that the worst period of time was between 2003 to 2009 or 11
Look, I think
for the Mandaean, and then they feel, as I heard from many interviewees, they said now it is much better in terms, for example, the representation, because the Mandaean also start talking, and they have channels on social media. They start telling people who they are and what they do, not like before, prior to 2003 or after 2003, the US-led invasion. So there are many platforms where they can talk now, not like before. So as I heard that the worst period was between 2003 and 2009 or 11. Is it true?
there's been many instances in Mandaean history where massacres have happened. I don't think it's fair for me to say that between 2003 and 2011 was the worst. I think that's purely subjective for me to give that opinion. But I do think it was during that period where most people sought humanitarian refuge in all parts of the world. And it was probably due to the invasion and due to the community being heavily persecuted, but also due to opportunities for people to seek humanitarian refuge. And in terms to answer the second part of your question, which has now flown out of my mind, sorry. Where were we?
Something.
Jump in.
Yeah. In 2014, I remember I was invited by a non-government organization to attend through the non-government organization the Human Rights Council in Geneva. And in 2014 was like they were discussing the human rights issues in Iraq and a couple of countries. And I remember after the session, we met with other NGOs, and they were discussing the Mandaean issues in Iraq and Iran. And the discussion was about are the Mandaean community, or the Mandaean people, are they part of the people of the book, or they are not people of the book? So the discussion started, and we have two sides. One, they say, yes, they are part of the people of the book. They may be mentioned in Quran in three verses. They are the Sabians. They are the same group of people, and there is some Islamic scholars. They supported that, but others, they said no, they're not. And there is another Islamic scholars, they disagree with that. So I was quite interested in the conversation because I'm a Mandaean, but still I have to prove that I'm with a certain criterias or dimension. That will let me, my point is, and we're talking about human rights and cultural diversity, and my point that I would like to say is we are operating within a larger or dominant cultural system, and sometimes this cultural container somehow weakens sometimes, or sometimes strengthen other aspect of cultural elements within other minority groups. So without safety and continuous dialogue, we will keep building walls of exclusion and oppression. So yeah, thank you.
And I think that sort of answers and segues into one of the questions that we have. Someone saying Mandaeanism is not evangelical, and due to political instability, there are risks. And so, what's the community doing to maintain their religion and culture for the future? This is definitely a question for the community, and I think an internal dialogue needs and should be happening. And I think it starts with the young people really pushing that. And so I feel like the conversations are happening, although we don't see it quite as much. But I generally have hope that the next generation will be able to do more. And it is quite elusive, but I see that there's potential and a lot of room for work there.
Thank you, Rooan. We have another question. How is the religious hierarchy being maintained? Where is the Mandaean, Azhar, Najaf, Vatican for learning?
Look, I don't think there's a religious hierarchy. I feel like that term's Mandaeanism is egalitarian, and even though we have Ginzabras and shuyukh, clergymen, they're really teachers, and so I don't think there's necessarily a religious hierarchy. But in terms of learning, we do have the Mandi Ginzabra Dakhil, which is in Liverpool, and I think there's also another centre near the Nepean River for baptism. And of course, there's Yuhana Nashmi's studio. I'm sure he would be more than happy to answer questions if you wanted to learn more about Mandaeanism.
Thank you. And we have another question. Traditionally, the community was always known for its inquisitive work with jewelry and silver specifically, I believe. Is there a continuation for this tradition, and is there a reason for this specialization?
I'm not exactly sure if there's a reason for the specialization, but I do know that they're brilliant with their craft and they're brilliant hands-on. And as I mentioned, like my dad himself was an alchemist, and he made gold and worked with silver, and he had his own jewelry store. I'm not sure, but they just do it great. That's their niche, and it worked, so they went along with it.
Mhm. Another question: how do you see the future of Mandaean? Will it still be closed off, or do you see there will be more integration and sharing of the culture?
Oh, I definitely see that there's potential for integration and sharing of the culture. My vision for Mandaeanism is that it's democratic and accessible. And if we're taking the idea that Mandaeanism is knowledge and a knowledge-based community, then knowledge should be and is accessible to every human being who has an interest. And so definitely, I think we are seeing the issues now that are prevalent because we are first generations living in Australia, but I think after a second generation or a third generation, there will definitely be an integration and sharing of the culture.
Mhm. There is the issue of not having the Mandaean in the curriculum or in Iraqi education. Is it still the problem, or I've heard that they are trying to address that with the Ministry of Education?
I'm not exactly sure. I honestly
Mhm.
have not looked into what's happening in Iraq, but that sounds like a fantastic initiative. And if they were keen to put in a Mandaean curriculum for young people in Iraq, I think there's really no con to that. If we have one more question, it's asking in relation to the Mandaic language, is it used for communication or is it more a religious language now? And do Mandaeans have any educational institution where they can learn the language or only in families? Look, there are some terms, and I think Yuhana might be able to answer this. There are everyday terms that Mandaeans use, um, but it is used primarily for like rituals. But Johanna, we were talking about this actually Monday night.
Yeah, we do have actually established Mandaean schools in Sweden and in the States and in Australia. Mainly here, we have a good resource and a good number of Mandaeans to start that initiative. And one of the community centers started that, and but still is um, it needs more support to revive the language within the Mandaean themselves. Um, there is other stuff we just knew to get out of. We starting the community started to or trying to organize themselves to open up they are in still in conversation with their environment. Some we still experiencing or dealing with the traumatic experiences and the effects of the trauma, a collective trauma, intergenerational trauma. So all of that, the community from within, they're trying their best to address the issues one by one. So it's a long road.
It is a long road.
Uh,
And the Mandaean community, it's good to mention that they are split between Iraq and Iran. So we have a Mandaean community in Iran as well, and a Mandaean community in Iraq, and they both, unfortunately, they left both countries to the west to seek protection, um, and now they are, uh, you know, some people they speak Farsi, some people they speak Arabic. Now scattered around the world. The new generation they speak the language. They are in the country they are in. They live in. So this is one of the challenges. But as I mentioned, it's still in the Mandarins are in conversation with their environment, and I'm sure they're gonna find some you know um, not to be decided to, as you mentioned, or forced to be isolated as a survival techniques. I believe and I'm hoping that the Mandarins will adapt more uh, um, healthy way to revive their culture and to stay as a community. There is always external factors and internal factors.
Absolutely.
Mhm. Yeah, yeah, thank you. Yeah, one of the issues that with the Mandaeanism is that it's closed. It's not a missionary religion, right?
Yes, the
Yes.
Mandarins they prohibit it. That's one of the teachings that I go to other people, knock the door, and convince them of Mandaeism. That's not the way that we do it.
Hmm.
That's not, we don't do that. So the
Okay.
Mandaeans, it's based on inner self,
Hmm.
uh, and finding the knowledge of Manda, gnosis, within
Yeah.
the person's inner self.
Thank you.
And they believe, according to the philosophy, they believe if you faith by itself is blind, needs knowledge, needs the knowledge of the heart and the mind, the nishma. Um, and they don't, um, if they believe if you take your faith outside yourself, it becomes political, um, and they don't do that. So that's why it's very hard for them. And I mention it in my presentation. The Mandaean faith is based on your inner experience. So based on experience. Um,
Mhm.
yeah, so that's why sometimes you don't get a quite a good answer when you ask about the religion,
Yeah.
because it's based on your own experience within the spiritual. Yeah.
Thank you. We have another question. Do you think that there will be changes made by the leaders or sheikhs within the religion regarding some practices and conversion rules?
There is always look. Um, I can't answer this question, but what I can say is, first, the Mandaean, they are dealing with intergenerational trauma collectively about their culture. The Mandaeans in conversation, in a healing process, and in conversation with their environment. Some of the practices they adapted to these practices as a survival techniques, strategies. They're not part of their faith or their philosophy or religion or culture, and contradict with the literature. So, but if you are in a survival mode, this flight, fight, freeze. So collectively, the people, can adopt the same, are you in the flight or fight or freeze states? So, yeah.
I guess we don't have any more questions. And I think we come to the end of today's webinar. And thank you very much indeed for you, Tarmida, Yuhana, and thank you very much for Rooan for your brilliant and amazing webinar. And thank you for the audience. And if you have anything to say before we can conclude.
Thank you, Rooan, and thank you, Dhiaa, and thank you, Zainab.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Tarmida, Dhiaa, Zainab. Thank you so much, and to the wider Nahrein network. Appreciate it.
Thank you very much, and good luck.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you.
Thank you.